Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Ginger Olszewski, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the opening event for our nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center's 7th annual March 4th, a program which commemorates the anniversary of Pat Conroy's death with conversations and activities honoring some of the major themes of Pat's writing life. March 4th continues through this weekend with additional events in Port Royal and on St. Helena Island, and appearances by authors John Lane and Megan Miranda, both of whom are in our audience tonight, as well as Marcus Amaker and J. Drew Vanham. Tonight we're honored to welcome back to Beaufort New York Times bestselling novelist De'Shawn Charles Winslow, who also participated in our Pat Conroy Literary Festival last fall in support of his debut novel, In West Mills, which was awarded the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and the Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction. His newly published second novel, Decent People, returns to West Mills with the social justice-themed murder mystery, which has already been recognized on the recommended reading lists of USA Today, Good Housekeeping, the American Booksellers Association's Indie Next, and Apple Books. Tonight, here at NeverMore Books, De'Shawn will be interviewed by our Conroy Center's Executive Director, Jonathan Haupt. Jonathan is the co-editor of Our Prince of Scribes, Writers Remember Pat Conroy. In his role as a frequent guest book reviewer for the Pulitzer Prize-winning Charleston Post and Courier, Jonathan wrote this about Decent People. By the fifth page in De'Shawn Charles Winslow's stellar sophomore novel, a trio of Black siblings have been shot to death, and their segregated and seemingly sleepy hamlet of West Mills, North Carolina, is hemorrhaging secrets. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Serving as both a first-rate literary mystery and a highly anticipated sequel to Winslow's debut, Decent People is a brilliantly threaded, character-driven novel that masterfully balances its themes of empathy and social justice with its structure as a page-turner of a small-town mystery. The narrative serves as an inviting point of entrance for new readers and a welcome return for Winslow's dedicated following into the fully realized world of West Mills, where love, be it romantic, familial, or platonic, can still alight a path home, even in the darkest of times. Please join me in welcoming De'Shawn Charles Winslow and Jonathan Haupt.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, De'Shawn, for coming back to Beaufort, too.
Thanks for inviting me back,
Yes.
and for that very kind review. I get to tell you in person, my editor and agent and I, we were trading emails with quotes. It was really heartwarming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It means a lot to me to get to review books and books that I believe in and authors that I want to support. And it's nice when I force Ginger to then read that review out loud to an audience, too. That's nice. No, Ginger did an awesome job with that introduction. Ginger does an awesome job with everything. I really appreciate her help as well. Yes, indeed. So you're just passing the review back and forth at the office one day? I appreciate that. I'm going to tell my editor that.
Right.
Adam will appreciate knowing that. What I want to talk about first of all, because we're here where in our low country where we've been watching a real murder mystery unfold for a while now. You too have written this amazing small town murder mystery, and I'm wondering about your desire to do that. This book, in comparison to In West Mills, even though they have overlapping setting and several overlapping characters, that book is sort of this beautifully paced character study. It takes place over a span of about 40 years. And those of you who've read it, you really feel like you're immersed into the lives of these people. It's a character study. It's really driven by a relationship, a platonic relationship between two characters. In this book, as I say in the review, 5 pages in, we got 3 dead bodies. We got a problem to solve. There's very different pacing in this one. So can you talk a little bit about how you arrived at this particular book and this is the driving force for it too?
Sure, yeah. So the book was not supposed to be a mystery at all. That was not the original plan for it. And I started writing in earnest during the beginning of COVID. And so I was, really distracted, of course, and confused about, everything. But I had this contract to fulfill. And so I had this book idea and I had already sold the book. And so I said, okay, I got to write it. And, but I was bored with where it was going. A lot of the book as it is there just minus the murder. It was going to be another character study type of novel. But I didn't have any fire for it. I didn't have a drive to get to the computer every day or even once a week. It was really hard to get to it once a week, and the clock is ticking. And I was watching a lot of TV, watching old mystery shows like Murder, She Wrote, Father Dowling mysteries, and new stuff like Law and Order, and all the new series that have come out on Netflix involving murder mysteries. And I said, you know what? Maybe I need to turn. The Harmons were originally going to die accidentally in a drowning. And I'll come back and tell you why I had that idea. But I decided that maybe one of them should be murdered, and that would raise the stakes for the characters, for me as the writer, and hopefully for the reader, And so I said, okay, one of them is going to get murdered. And then I decided that all three of them would just be murdered. This town hasn't had a murder in decades, and I said, why not give them a triple murder? Yeah, I just went for it. The reason why they were going to originally be drowned is because in my mother's hometown of South Mills, North Carolina, in the 70s, there was a drowning. 3 elderly women carpooled to church every Sunday, and when they were one of them lived on the bank of the canal, basically. And when they were backing out, something malfunctioned and the car went into the canal and they drowned. And I only learned about this about 6 years ago at a family function. And when I heard about it, it was like tire screeches, because I had heard all these stories growing up about all the little things that went on in her hometown, but I never heard about this triple drowning. And so that's where I got the idea for the drowning. I changed their identities, obviously, from 3 elderly white women to 3 black people, siblings. But again, the accidental drowning for me, it didn't provide high enough stakes. And so I said, murder it is. Yeah.
It's a really powerful driving engine for this story, because it is rare, because this has not happened in this community in decades, and yet still the police don't care, because it's these are black victims in a black community. But somebody cares. You need a detective of some kind.
Right.
And there's a chief suspect who is the half sibling of the Harmons, Olympus he's called, and he's not going to solve the crime, but somebody on his side is, and that brings us to your detective figure, Josephine, who I absolutely love. Like, I would watch a whole streaming series of Josephine just showing up at people's lawns, asking intrusive questions.
Right, and they throwing her out.
Yes. But, what I find so interesting about her is that she occupies this really interesting liminal space. She's not an insider and she's not an outsider. She's kind of both, and she's kind of neither, because she's from West Mills, but she's been gone for a while, and now she's come back, and this is the first thing that she's got to take care of when she gets back. So can you talk a little bit about where that character comes from, and where Limp comes from, is where that pairing of characters originates?
Yeah, so Josephine, born in West Mills, but was snatched away as a young girl, and really didn't know why she was snatched away, which she finds out towards the end of the novel. But she has lived in the North most of her life, and she has Northern sensibilities. And when she's ready, she's 60 years old, and when she's ready to retire, she returns to where she was born, and she remembers it being a happy, quiet place. And she's a strong woman. She doesn't need a man in her life, but she has had some failed relationships. And when she decides to move back to West Mills and she links up with Limp, she's like, this is finally the one. I'm 60 now, and I have found a mature man, and we're gonna go into the twilight together at some point. Um, and then he's accused of this murder. But what makes her different is that she doesn't quite yet know how to be a Southerner. So she's not used to groupthink. Everyone has decided that he is absolutely the murderer just because he ran off at the mouth. And she can't understand how people who have known him his entire life can just turn on him, on a dime. And so she's very blunt. She doesn't beat around the bush. When she has a question, she asks, and that rubs people the wrong way. Rubs people the wrong way. And Limp, he's a country fellow that everyone knows as a nice guy, but he has a temper. And so that puts her in this space where she's like, well, I'm fighting for this man's innocence, but could he be the killer? Am I marrying a killer? So, but I wanted that relationship to be there. Mostly because I need it for her. In the early drafts, there was no love story in there at all. She, at least not between them. She just wanted to take up the case because she didn't like the way he was being. He was just an old classmate, and she thought he was a nice guy, and she was going to come to his defense. But my editor said, I think you have to get her just a little bit more involved in his life, because someone may take up a case like this, but eventually they put it down because it's not really their business,
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I decided, okay, I'll let them be love interests. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I like the idea of romance for elders. For seniors. I like that. I like the idea of that. My mother's 74 now, and she's dates,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm like, this is real. People date past the age of 40, and so I wanted to like include that in the book. Yeah.
Some of the most beautiful love stories I've heard since being in Beaufort are from Ollie students, from Osher lifelong learning students, and they are those sort of late in life romances of people connecting after a spouse has passed away, or a divorce, or a second or third divorce, and you think, that's it, I'm on my own, and then there's that person, and that's it's authentic, it's beautiful, and I think you captured that really well in the story too. And it does give Joe, a reason to persevere through all of these moments. I want to circle back around to the idea of mystery and detective and all of that. And Megan Miranda and I will be having a very similar conversation about this topic tomorrow when I get to talk to her as well. But I've heard mystery novelists and thriller writers all describe this sort of vision where you've got to get your reader to believe any of the possibilities and then arrive at the real one too. But did you know who did it from the get-go? Were you writing toward a particular ending, or did you really need it to be, possible that any of these suspects, including Limp, could be our murderer?
Yes, I had no idea who the murderer would be. I bounced back and forth, and there was another character in the book that I ended up taking out because I think her story was going to take over the book, and maybe that's a book of its own. But at one point, some people in her household was going to be the killer, and it just kept bouncing back and forth. And 100 pages in, I said, you know what, you have to decide who the killer is, so that you can start steering things, that way. So yeah, it was hard, and this is my first mystery, obviously, and I had never even tried it before, never even thought about it. So it was rough deciding who, because I think what I tried to do is I tried to make it so that everyone we meet has some sort of reason, even if it's a big reason or a minor reason to dislike the Harmons. And at some point I said, well, maybe the killer doesn't have to have a serious reason. Maybe that'll be the surprise. Maybe it'll be a silly reason. Maybe it'll be mental illness and they didn't even realize they were doing it, and I was like, no, now I'm going too far off the deep end. But yeah, it was a challenge deciding who.
I'll be very protective of the ending. We won't give any spoilers, but it's an incredibly satisfying ending. The arrival at not just the who, but the motivations, the whole scenario of it just makes perfect sense in the world that you've created and the tapestry of characters that you've given us. I want to talk a little bit about some of those other characters too, some of the other suspects. So, a lot of reviewers, including me, have described this as a sequel in as much as it takes place in West Mills at a much more condensed time period. But some of the characters come back from the original. And I'm wondering, were you ever tempted to just put them all back in there? We're just going to go full force into a sequel. Or were you letting this particular narrative kind of dictate which characters from that first book would still be relevant in West Mills to this particular story?
Yeah. I never thought that I would use like all of them. I did want them to be, I wanted the books to be totally separate, and for people to be able to read them out of order. But I did know that I wanted Eunice, Breezy, and Leroy to be in the novel. Yeah. And the other people who kind of pop in, they only pop in mostly because of that family.
Right.
Like Otis Lee is one of the main characters in West Mills, but he doesn't make an appearance at all, but his wife does just for a moment on the phone. And my lead character from In West Mills, she just pops in for just one page and then she's out.
Not has a really nice cameo. It was nice to see her in any capacity.
Yeah.
So I was glad that she was back.
Yeah. I think I was just, aside from, the three Lovings, the other cameos were basically just for people who read In West Mills, and it was like, this is a gift to you for reading that book, and if you liked it, you get to see these people again for a moment. Yeah.
It was a gift. It really did feel that way. It really felt like it was a reward for having supported and enjoyed the first novel. That even though these characters, some of them are not essential to this storyline, certainly Eunice and Breezy and Leroy are absolutely essential. And I want to spend a little more time talking about them. But when Knott pops up, it's like, oh, that's great. I remember like being at a family reunion. There's the one cousin you want to see one time a year, and you're good, right?
Good enough.
Yep. Yes. Both of the books really have a lot to say about race, about gender, about orientation as well, but it's so much more overt in this book, particularly with Leroy's story, which is powerful. And there too, I suppose we need to be protective of some spoilers.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, were you trying to honor the different time period that you're in, or the different time period that we're in, that you were writing the book in, or both of those things, and kind of being much more overt about that subject matter in this particular book?
I think it may have had something to do with the current time period, but as I was writing it, I didn't realize it so much. A lot of the past few years, I think, maybe past 5 years, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the world against queer and trans, people. And while it wasn't my intention to write about that subject, I think it just made its way on the page. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm a queer writer, but I'm a queer person, but I don't like to be considered a queer writer because I don't want to feel that every book I write has to address LGBTQ issues, because it can be really easy to get put in that box and you're not allowed to do anything else. But this time, and so In West Mills is very light on queer issues. But with this book, without realizing it initially, it's sort of a queer book. I mean, I think it's Leroy's queerness that sort of jumps off that kind of starts everything, or most of the issues in the book. Yeah.
It does resonate above and beyond just his story. And he's not the only queer character in this as well. This is a town that has a history of making people leave.
Yeah.
We're trying to change them, and we counter, sort of plot lines along both of those avenues in this particular story. what was interesting to me, and I didn't notice it so much the first time I was reading, but it jumped out the second time, is when Leroy's mother, Eunice, sort of realizes her son's identity and the way in which he's going to express it, and approaches Dr. Harmon about curing it.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a church when that happens. I mean, you pick a very specific setting for them both to be perfectly comfortable having this conversation.
Yeah. They believe that what they are doing, what they're planning, is of God, and so what other place to plan this this event? I remember having a conversation with someone, and I was like, it's like a drug deal going down in the church, but they don't view it that way.
They don't, no,
at all.
They don't at all. No, this is church business as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
This is the appropriate place to have this conversation.
Right.
We spent a lot of time in private family homes, and you really get to see just how diverse the population of in West Mills is, how far that pendulum springs from very wealthy and well off to not at all that. And I want to talk a little bit about the characters of Ted and his daughter Savannah. And I was a few pages in before I finally sunk in that Savannah was white. I was not reading her that way initially, and I think part of that is because she's almost shockingly progressive within the concept or within the framework of the book. Not perfect. Right. Nobody in this book is perfect. Right. Everybody's got a secret, including Joe. They've all made poor life decisions at some point. But Savannah is really trying to be forward thinking in a lot of the decisions and choices that she's making, and in a household where that's not welcome at all. So would you talk a little bit about where that family and that father-daughter relationship in particular came from?
Sure. So Savannah she's in her 30s, and she comes from a well-to-do family on the east side of town, which is essentially the white side of town. And she was raised pretty much in a racist home. But she falls in love with a black man and marries him, and they move away. But when she comes back, for circumstances that I won't spoil, she finds herself as the only white woman, I'll just say the only white woman living on the black side of town. So she has two sons, two biracial sons. So she has to navigate blackness as a white woman, in this small community. And she has a reputation. She hasn't done anything wrong except fall in love with a black man. But she has the scarlet letter, so to speak, on her everywhere she goes in town, and affects what jobs she can get, so on and so forth. But and her father is, I'm trying to say this without spoiling her. We'll just say her father is a racist, and so, but he was a good father to her. He was to her he was a good man until she fell in love with a black man. And so there's this duality that she has to deal with. And a point comes in the novel where she has to decide whether to use her white privilege, and then you'll find out how she uses it, or if she uses it at all, and to what extent. But her father, Ted, he's very complicated. He's a second son, so he didn't have a lot going on for himself. The wealth that he has is passed down from his father, and then his older brother. Then his older brother dies, and then he inherits it all. He's an easygoing person, and I think the reason why I say I didn't want to spoil, but maybe I will a little bit. The thing is, the question becomes, is Ted really racist? Or is he just a man who was raised in this patriarchal environment, and who is taught that I should be in control? I'm supposed to have the wealth. I'm not supposed to like black people, or let black people marry my daughter. And so the question that I think I pose to the reader is Ted racist or isn't he? Is the person he's presenting to the public the real him, or what? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I'll I'll share just a quick anecdote as to how Ted's character formed for me. When I was growing up, there was a older white couple that lived down the road from me, like maybe a 10-minute walk, and they had a little store in their front yard, and they just sold sodas and candies and that sort of thing. And a really nice couple. And me and my friends and cousins, we would go and we would buy the stuff. And Mr. Logan he was so nice to us, you know. When I say us, we were a group of all black kids. I grew up in a neighborhood that was kind of mixed, but like, you know, one end is all black of the road, the other end is all white. But instead, we all ride the same school bus and go to school together and all that. But he was always really nice. And I remember at one point when I got a little older, maybe like 13, I remember my mom saying, "We're not giving any more money to Mr. Logan." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "He's a Klansman." And I didn't really know fully. I had heard the word, but I was like, "What is a Klansman?" And she sort of explained the history, you know. And I was like, "No, he can't be a Klansman. Why would he let us in his store? Why would he, you know?" But anyway, as I got older and thought about that, um, it made me wonder. I believe that he was a Klansman. I believe she didn't just come up with that information out of thin air. But what I did think about when I thought back on it years later, I wondered, was he a real Klansman in his heart, or was he a Klansman because it was expected of him to become a Klansman? Now, of course, no one will ever know. But I was, you know, I'm always curious about these doubles sometimes that we have, the person that we present and the person that we really are. And so Mr. Logan is one of those people that I wonder about. Like, how can a man who is a member of a group who would drag people out of their homes and burn them and all so forth, how can he be so kind to these black kids and like he showed us genuine care? What's your teacher's name? How are your grades? Well, you know, what do you want to do when you graduate?
He was invested in
He
your
was
lives.
really invested. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm inclined to believe that if he indeed was a Klansman, that it was probably something he felt he had to do to fit in with his people, with his, you know, his circle. But I mean, I don't know. Yeah. So he influenced Ted's character. Yeah.
None of us is ever really just one thing, of course, and that's what you do so well in both books, and that's certainly true with Ted, but not just Ted. There's nuance to everybody. Nobody's all bad, nobody's all good. Everybody's got secrets, and their lives are all being upended. Things are being put at risk that they've been able to hide and keep from public view for a long time. Yeah. And now here comes Joe knocking on the door, asking the wrong question in the wrong time. But because of that, because so much of this really is set up in that sort of investigator interview model, you're leaning really hard into the dialogue. And when I turn a page in your novel and I scan where I'm headed and I see quotation marks, you know, down both pages, like, yes, because you write dialogue so well. I love reading just conversations between two people, the banter, the back and forth, particularly in moments when we know people aren't being entirely truthful. And it's like, what are they going to say to this person in this moment versus what they just said somewhere else? How do you do that? How do you as a writer write dialogue so well?
You know, I guess the true answer is that I don't know. I think it comes from just being from a family of talkers and just growing up with people who just were always speaking, you know? I don't know that's kind of my answer. I know it's a little lame, but it sort of comes naturally. When I wrote this book, I started with dialogue. That's what I do first, you know? My work always looks like a screenplay at first. And then I go back in and fill out the conversations and what they were wearing and where they were standing and history and backstory. I think it just comes from oral tradition. That's that's all I can come up with.
Yeah. I appreciate that's your approach to drafting. I'm actually trying a lengthy story that way right now, where I'm just writing the dialogue,
Yeah.
seeing how far I can get on that alone,
Mm-hmm.
and then doing exactly the thing that you're describing. I'll go back in and fill in if I need to. But
Yeah, I think it's a good. It works for me.
it
A friend
definitely
of
works
mine
for
who is a
you.
playwright told me. She said it's like writing a play, but you go back and put the stage directions in
Hmm.
later. You know,
Hmm.
so
Or challenge yourself to see if you can't. Can I make it clear they're in an elevator without
right,
saying, hey, they're in an elevator, right?
exactly. Yeah.
So yes, it's a fun way to draft.
Hmm.
It definitely stretches muscles
Right.
in a way that just doing it in a more traditional,
Yeah.
straightforward way
Yeah.
wouldn't do.
And you get a lot of pages, so that feels good. You're like,
Yes,
oh,
false sense
that's
of
a 400
accomplishment.
page novel, and then when you go back in and you're like, okay,
Yes, maybe not that,
right.
maybe not all that. So let's talk about point of view, which is kind of related to what we were just talking about, because it can't all just be from Joe's point of view. You really need to spend some time with other characters,
Yeah.
because they're not going to tell Joe everything. That's part of their motivation for keeping secrets, and somebody's got a big secret to keep.
Hmm.
So it can't just be Joe, Joe, Joe.
Right.
So how did you decide who was going to be a point of view character and who wasn't, and then how to balance it, how to kind of bounce back and forth between those folks?
Hmm. So, well, I knew that I did not want Leroy to have a voice,
Hmm.
and it's because I'm more interested. I was more interested in how adults respond or feel about a queer teen versus how. I mean, I know how a queer teen feels, and so I like to explore the unknown, and so I wanted to imagine how do parents feel if they have a queer child in an environment or in a religion that they wish it was different.
Hmm.
So I knew that I was not going to give Leroy a voice or
A point of
a
view.
point of view of
Hmm.
his own. Um, Everyone else, it was kind of similar to who the murderer is. I would start writing someone's point of view, and I'd be like, no, I don't need them to talk for 60 pages. I don't need to have their thoughts
Yeah.
for 60 pages. Limp, for example, he was going to have his own point of view, and
Hmm.
I decided I don't need to spend that much time with him.
Hmm.
Um, but I need to spend time with his fiance who's wondering if he's guilty or
Hmm.
innocent.
Yeah.
So I had written one chapter for Limp, and I pulled out some of the dialogue and used it in her and Joe's
Hmm.
sections. Um, but yeah, you're right. I needed to go into everyone else's minds for the reason you just said, that for what they're withholding. Yeah,
Hmm.
it was the only way, because otherwise Joe would have to be walking around talking to people all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it was kind of logistical.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like writing scenes with teenagers, with
Um,
Leroy and the other boys too, as well?
mhm.
Because those are really well done, even though they're not point of view characters for the good reason you just explained.
Yeah.
They're We still get to hang out with them and sort of engage with their relationships in interesting ways.
Yeah. That took some dipping into my own teen years and
Hmm.
sort of um, trying to remember. I didn't hang around with boys very much. And so the few times that I do remember having um, more typical male friends, I
Hmm.
sort of tapped into those memories as best I could. How
Hmm.
how boys banter with each other and call each other
Yeah.
stupid and you know and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it was. I have so few of those scenes because I didn't have a lot to work
To
with
draw
to
from.
draw from. Yeah, so that's
Yes.
why I kept those
Yeah.
those scenes few. I mean, and I'm not a white man and I'm not a white woman, and so I could also say the same thing about Savannah
And Ted.
and Ted's sections. But I think the reason why I was able to write them, I think, is because I'm an adult, and and I've
Yeah.
met lots of other adults with different perspectives and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it is just imagining what would a person who is this age, born in this year, in this environment, how might they feel about X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy doing that, but I think that's probably why I haven't written like the gay novel yet, because I'm more interested in exploring what I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to open it up to questions in just a few minutes. So this is your 5-minute warning game. But I want to pick up right on that last thing that you said about exploring, because that sort of gets us to the idea of who really seems to be the main character of both books, and that's the town of West Mills itself, which has a character arc, which particularly in the first novel, it's very different at the end versus how we encounter it at the beginning. And even though this novel unfolds on a much smaller, much more compact timeline, we can still see that things that have been buried and unknown are about to be known, and that too is going to change the landscape of this town, or seems like it could. Although West Mills is pretty resistant to change as well. So could you talk a little bit about why you decided to go back to West Mills at all? And I suppose my implied follow-up question is, are you done with West Mills now? Is West Mills done with you?
It's I am taking a break from West Mills, but I'm not done. I'm not done with it. Yeah, there are probably at least 3 characters whose lives I like to pop back into, from West Mills.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why I returned to it largely is because it's based on South Mills, North Carolina, which I know so well. And so I can visualize it when I'm writing. I can, even though I changed the name of the town and changed street names and road names, I can visualize it, which helps me really get into the groove. But I mean, the primary reason for returning to it is because I was going to use the Lovings again, and I thought, well, I can't move them somewhere else. What the readers know about them, it wouldn't make sense for me to move them to some other city or state. But I think the town does have an arc in that it progresses a little bit with time visually. Chains start to pop up, McDonald's and that sort of thing. But as you mentioned, the characters, the people are resistant toward social change. They still kind of want things to remain the way that they've always been, and that's mostly to maintain power, largely. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. Oh, absolutely, you did. Am I correct in remembering that this book technically takes place inside the time frame of In West Mills? Does that go up to the 1980s? And this is 1976, is that right? Yes.
So I back it up.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you really had to not put anything into this that was then going to affect the final moments of In West Mills, or could be perceived as kind of throwing that out of whack?
I did. I did want to make sure that didn't happen, even though I wanted to make sure that the books weren't perceived as a part 1, part 2.
Right.
I still wanted them, if someone read them together back to back, I didn't want something to happen that would say, no, that doesn't make sense. So I did have to have a copy of In West Mills handy at all times to say, now what year did I say that happened?
Very smart.
Yeah.
Yes. Continuity control, I suppose that would be, right? Yeah. Well, you mentioned taking a break from West Mills, and this will be my last question before we open it up to whatever questions we may have in the room. So what are you writing now or next, if not a West Mills novel?
I think I'm not writing it yet, but it's being written up here.
Yeah.
I think I'll set the next book in my actual hometown of Elizabeth City, North Carolina. I think I'll go with a real place and not change street names and just use some real tangible stuff. And that's all I'll say for now, because I'm still in the process of making decisions. I might change my mind, and it might be West Mills again. But my
Yeah.
plan is to put it to set it aside for a book or two.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. For you and West Mills to kind of see other people for
Right.
a little
Right.
while. Right.
Exactly.
Yes. I can appreciate that. What about y'all? Anybody got a burning question for De'Shawn that we can address? Zippy, your hand shot up there.
The title of the book.
Decent People.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So that's not my baby. So when I sold the book, it was called Pharaoh's Army, and that was based on a conversation that Limp has with his mother. But when I was editing, I ended up cutting that conversation, and in the title, I tried to make it work because I liked it, But the Pharaoh's Army was referring to the three Harmons who are killed. And so when my editor and I, we were trying to come up with a new title, and he was like, "Send me like 5 titles," and I sent them to them and sent them to him, and he wrote back like 10 minutes later. He said, "None of these work. They're too clunky," and I agree. They were too clunky. But what he did is he saw the theme in all like 5 of those potential titles, and he said, "I think what you're getting at is like people thinking they're decent or doing decent things when they're actually not, And so he said, how about decent folks or decent people?" And I said, "Decent people," and that's what it was.
You landed on.
Yeah.
I felt that it reflects who you are.
Oh.
In the way, the enormity of the way you look at these people and being able to see the complexity of the people. I think you have to be a decent person, not to lock people into one particular way of being, like the man that sold you sodas and snacks. The way you talked about that was enormous.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In the way you write, in the way that you navigate this world, you have such a deep sense of empathy, De'Shawn. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Earlier today, as Zippy knows because she was there, De'Shawn went out to Beaufort Academy to speak to some of Claire's students, actually, in DALA Book Club, a diversity awareness youth literacy organization. Yes, long name. I didn't come up with it. Decent people was already taken, so we had to use something else. But you listened and you responded to those kids in a really empathetic way as well, which I so appreciated.
Yeah.
But an idea was thrown around, and part of the reason I invite you out to BA every time you're here is so that we can listen to Elizabeth Foster, and sooner or later Lizzie's going to say something brilliant, and I'm going to steal that and make it a question, and it's worked out, both times. But that club, those students were reading The Bluest Eye. They were reading Toni Morrison's book and responding to that today. And Lizzie said something about, from her perspective, that's a really challenging read because that's so far removed from any experience she's ever had or is ever going to have, just to be perfectly honest about it. And because of that, she can just close the book and put it on a shelf any time and choose whether she picks it up again or doesn't. She has that. But for the people who are living lives like what's described in the book, that's not optional for them at all. That's not a hypothetical situation. So for them to be seen on the page, for someone who's had any subset of that experience to be able to read it and see that somebody else turned trauma into art, turned it into a work of beauty, is powerful. And then for a kid like Lizzie to experience that vicariously to the degree that she can on the page is powerful as well. And you give us like a whole catalog of that in this book. I mean, there are a lot of cautionary tales in here, but these are decisions that people can and do make, and there are consequences for that as well.
Yeah.
So I know I was going to do audience questions, but Zippy sent me down this rabbit hole, and I'm going to see where it goes. My question is, are you deciding that intentionally? Are you intentionally picking character traits that you want to show in this way to show the range of things range of difficult topics that are in fact real and genuine to someone's experience, even if they're not true to every single reader's experience?
Yeah, I think it is. when I first start writing, I'm just thinking about writing, just people, sort of everyday sort of things, and then it turns into, a little bit of a lesson. Like, I bet most readers haven't met a person who've experienced X,
Yes.
So let me put it on the page so
Mm-hmm.
that they know that it occurs,
Yeah.
And so Leroy's experience, that's something that happens a lot. Even, I won't spoil, but I'll just say that there are still parents who, I mean, it's conversion, a form of conversion therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and it happens in many different ways. People with a lot of money may send their kids to camps for it, but other people have other means that don't cost them a thing,
Yeah.
And so these things do happen. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's just verbal. But that was something that I wanted to like shine a light on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And addiction, I come from a family where people, not in my immediate family, but my extended family, lots of different types of addiction, gambling, alcoholism, drug use. And, but for a lot of those people, I didn't know that they were an addict because life forced them to have to live very functional lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it's not until you're 15 or 16 that you realize your aunt has a gambling addiction because she goes to work every day, and so you don't even know that there's a problem. And so I wanted to also shine a light on addiction, and that everyone who has an addiction isn't lost, to the world. And I want to sort of destigmatize not the addiction, but the person, the addict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing in the book, in both books, the addiction thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is true in both books, because we have that with Nod as well. And in a couple of different categories of addiction in her case. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I do want to shine a light on things that are maybe not that they're uncommon, but we have a common way that things are presented. Alcoholism, for example. When we see an alcoholic in a book or in a TV show, they're stumbling and and slurring, but it's not always the case.
No.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People cope and navigate in different ways and function.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other audience questions? Anybody got one? Yes, way in the back. Hey, Teresa.
Who are some of your literary inspirations? Who do you read that make you go, yes, I want to keep going, I got to do another book just because they inspired you?
Yeah. Toni Morrison is right up there, number one probably. Yeah. And then Alice Walker, both of them, mostly because they write a lot about Black family, And then Elian Harris is the first queer Black writer that I ever read. And so reading his books was, it was eye-opening. I mean, his novels tend to have professional Black gay men. And when I first encountered his work, I think I was 19 or 20. So, but it did two things for me. It showed me gay Black men on the page, but it also showed me professional gay Black men, like lawyers and doctors. And so it made me want to go to college, when I may not have ordinarily. And so, yeah, those are the people that I read, and I think they did it. They gave me permission to write about these topics and these people. And so I return to their work, all of them. Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you. Yes, Bruce.
Sort of selfish curiosity. I was raised by South Carolinians. I was raised and educated in North Carolina. What was the town you said that Westminster was based on?
South Mills.
South Mills.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You can have a second question. It's allowed. Yeah, you got something on your mind, I can tell.
Yeah, well,
yes,
it's a quick question.
Sure.
Was Leroy in the first book?
Mm-hmm.
And what gave you the courage to come out in the second book to really focus on this? I think you were very successful with your first book. And that would have given me courage to say I could write what I need to write.
Yeah.
But I was just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, Leroy is in the first book, but for most of the novel, he's a child that's only mentioned a little bit. There is one scene when he's a young adult that he goes to visit his grandmother, and she sort of alludes that she thinks he's gay, based on who he brings along on that visit. But I don't know what gave me the courage to like really bring out the queer part. I mean, other than again the stuff that I was sort of seeing in the news and it was swirling around in my mind. But that's a good question. I too wonder what made me say, okay, I'm gonna do it this time.
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a really powerful character arc in this novel.
Thanks.
To the sort of the second half of Zippy's question about the success of In West Mills, which was, as Ginger said in the introduction, multiple award winner, New York Times, notable book. Every good thing that you would hope happens to your debut novel kind of happened to you. And this is doing incredibly well. It was on a bunch of most anticipated lists, and the reviews have been extraordinary. That's got to feel incredibly gratifying, but does it also come with a certain amount of pressure as you think about, book 3, book 4, and so on, to carry that weight?
It doesn't provide pressure, and the reason why it doesn't is because one of my teachers told me a long time ago. She said, I can tell you who it was. It's Ayanna Mathis, and her first book was selected by Oprah for the Oprah Book Club. And of course, that, changed her life. But one of the things that she told me and my classmates, she said, you can't get used to that sort of thing. Because the publishing industry can be strange, And so they'll give you lots and lots of flowers on your first book. The second one will come out, they won't give you a petal, And so she says you have to write every book and assume that no one will care. And so I've really taken that advice to heart. I've really taken that advice to heart. And so when decent people were starting to come out, getting ready to come out, and people would say, you won that award, and so now you gotta win the X award. And I say, no, I don't. No, I don't. I want people to read it and like it. But an award, it's a nice thing. You put it on your resume, and if there's a prize, a financial prize attached, that's always good, of course. But a lot of people forget about that you got an award, and sometimes every book is like their introduction to you all over again. And so that's why I don't let past successes pressure me. I appreciate them, and I'm glad I have them. And they do sort of give me permission. They do say to me, you're not so bad, you can do it again, But I kind of leave it there.
I think that's a really healthy mindset, and that's a difficult moment to strike for a lot of artists, literary or otherwise, who might be at a similar moment. So I applaud you for thinking that way. I hope you hold true to that. I think flowers versus petals kind of resonated with you too, Valerie, right? Yes. Yes. Another question. Yes.
So, awards may be off the table, but hopefully you'll be a New York Times bestseller, because this bookstore is a reporting bookstore. So if we buy
good.
We'll help you get there.
Good. Thank you.
You are in a very supportive bookstore right now, De'Shawn. We're
feel it.
Thrilled to have you here. And because we have more people than chairs, you are guaranteed a standing ovation by default, which is going to feel really good as well. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and I hope to see you throughout our March 4th weekend. I know a lot of you are signed up for that as well. This is a really special thing to get to do here in NeverMore tonight, and I'm just so thrilled you were able to come back, De'Shawn.
Yeah.
So books are available for sale, thanks to Lori and Dave. And let's give De'Shawn a big hand, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And